Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about George Bernard Shaw's play Arms and the Man. So this was published with his collection Volume 2 of plays Pleasant and Unpleasant. Volume 2 was the plays Pleasant. And it's somewhat ironic that Arms and the Man was listed as a pleasant play, even though it's a comedy. And it's extremely funny. I find this play absolutely delightful. But one of the major thematic concerns of Arms and the Man is breaking down romantic illusions. It's literally a play about having one's fantasies and expectations shattered. So not necessarily something many people would regard as pleasant. So the play is set during a war between Bulgaria and Serbia. On the one side are the Bulgarians and the Russians, and on the other side are the Serbians and the Austrians, or the Austro-Hungarians, perhaps more accurately. The play takes place in the house of the Petkovs, who are a Bulgarian noble family. On the night of the Battle of Slivnica, in which the Bulgarians and the Russians crush the Serbians. So the first act takes place in the bedroom of Raina Petkov, who is a comparatively cosmopolitan young noblewoman. And into her room comes a fugitive from the Serbian army, specifically a Swiss mercenary. They spend some time together, he basically seeking sanctuary from the roving patrols of Bulgarians and Russians who are attempting to round up and or execute escaping Serbs. And so they spend some time together, they get to know one another, and she agrees basically to provide him with sanctuary. Act 2 takes place in the house, the lower portion of the house, after peace has been declared. The family returns. Raina's father returns. He was fighting in the war, as does her fiance, Major Sergius, who is something of a dandy. But the other person who returns is Captain Blunchley, the Swiss soldier from the first act, whom Raina and her mother had basically sort of disguised and gotten out of the country so that he wouldn't be executed or captured. So Captain Blunchley returns. Sergius and Raina's father do not know that Blunchley had taken refuge in their house, and so Raina and her mother are trying to keep that secret, and so there's a whole series of people keeping secrets, people revealing secrets, etc., etc. The third act takes place in the house as well. Again, the same basic set of characters there, same basic situation, but we move toward a resolution. So, it's primarily a play about confronting romantic illusions. Bernard Shaw himself is part of what he would call the new school, or the new drama, what we would now classify as modern drama, capital M for modern, which would include people like Ibsen, Strindberg, Shaw, people who write these sort of social problem plays using a realist dramatic approach. And we get that here as well. But we also have, but because of Shaw's particular politics, including the politics of dramatic or literary realism, he's very interested in confronting these ideas of romantic illusions. We get this really almost from the beginning, because in this fairly long novelistic stage description for the first act, one of the things it says is, "On the balcony, a young lady, intensely conscious of the romantic beauty of the night and of the fact that her own youth and beauty are part of it, is gazing at the snowy Balkans." This is Raina. So we have this sort of initial element. We get this emphasized and developed in the opening portion of this first act. Raina's mother, Catherine, comes in and is telling her about the battle and things like this, and how Sergius, her fiancé, was one of the sort of key figures. And Raina here says, "It proves that all our ideas were real after all." Catherine says, "Our ideals real? What do you mean?" Raina says, "Our ideas of what Sergius would do, our patriotism, our heroic ideas. I sometimes used to doubt whether they were anything but dreams. Oh, what faithless little creatures girls are. When I buckled on Sergius' sword, he looked so noble, it was treason to think of disillusion or humiliation or failure. And yet, promise me you'll never tell him." Catherine says, "Don't ask me for promises until I know what I'm promising." Raina says, "Well, it came into my head just as he was holding me in his arms and looking into my eyes, that perhaps we only had our heroic ideas because we were so fond of reading Byron and Pushkin, and because we were so delighted with the opera that season at Bucharest. Real life is so seldom like that. Indeed, never as I knew it then." And then a little bit later we've got this other line where she says, "Oh, to think that it was all true, that Sergius is just as splendid and noble as he looks, that the world is really a glorious world for women who can see its glory and men who can act its romance. What happiness, what unspeakable fulfillment." So we've got some signs here that this is maybe an empty romance. This is an empty idealization. I mean, the references to Byron and Pushkin and the opera suggest, again, that this is a set of ideas, a set of ideals that are created by art, that they're not necessarily a reflection of life. And Raina acknowledges that openly. But then we've also got this phrase, "The world is really a glorious world for women who can see its glory and men who can act its romance." The idea of seeing its glory is an interesting one, because that may suggest the glory is there to be seen, or that may suggest that in seeking it, we find it. Because this is a thing we know about human beings, is that a lot of times we will find what we're looking for, whether it's there or not. But the idea of men acting its romance is an interesting one, because again, act can be an ambivalent term here. Is this acting in the sense of taking action, taking natural, real action, or is this acting in the sense of performing, of creating a theatrical illusion? So we've got these doubts expressed right from the beginning, and this is a big way in which Shaw is telling us this is the theme of the play. But we get this developed periodically throughout the play. When I'm just going to call him Blunchley, even though in Act 1 he's just referred to as Man, because we don't learn his name until Act 2. But when Blunchley tells Raina about having been in the battle where Sergius led this cavalry charge, he, at least in part, disillusions her. And it's clear that he is disillusioned about this. there's a lot here, and I don't want to read all of it, but it's actually definitely worth reading because the whole play is hilarious. But he describes the cavalry charge, and he does it from the perspective of a professional soldier. So he says, "Well, come, is it professional to throw a regiment of cavalry on a battery of machine guns with the dead certainty that if the guns go off, not a horse or man will ever get within 50 yards of the fire? I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it." So, from the perspective of a professional soldier, the charge that Sergius led against the orders of his Russian commanders didn't make any sense. It was the absolutely wrong thing to have done. And he describes for her seeing a cavalry charge from his perspective. He says, "Well, it's a funny sight. It's like slinging a handful of peas against a window pane. First one comes, then 2 or 3 close behind, and then all the rest in a lump." Raina says, "Yes, the first one, the bravest of the brave." Blunchley says, "You should see the poor devil pulling at his horse." Raina says, "Why should he pull at his horse?" Blunchley says, "It's running away with him, of course. Do you suppose the fellow wants to get there before the others and be killed? Then they all come. You can tell the young ones by the wildness in their slashing. The old ones come bunched up under the number 1 guard. They know they're mere projectiles and that it's no use trying to fight. The wounds are mostly broken knees from the horses cannoning together." Raina says, "Ugh, but I don't believe the first man is a coward. I believe he is a hero." Blunchley says, "That's what you would have said if you'd seen the first man in the charge today." Raina says, "I knew it. Tell me about him." Blunchley says, "He did it like an operatic tenor, a regular handsome fellow with flashing eyes and lovely moustache, shouting his war cry and charging like Don Quixote at the windmills. We nearly burst with laughing at him." So this is the way that Blunchley tells it. It is an operatic scene. It is this sort of romantic scene of a cavalry charge out of a chivalric romance, but it was a suicide decision. The problem is Sergius didn't know that it was a suicide decision because the only thing that he knows about war is what he's seen in operas, what he's read in novels, etc., etc. So what Blunchley reveals is that the only reason that this maneuver was successful was not because of Sergius's bravery, the cavalry's bravery. It's because his battery of machine guns didn't have the right ammunition. So they weren't able to fight back. So we have this sort of breaking of the illusion of noble combat, etc., etc. We later get a breaking down of what Sergius calls the higher love, because he is supposed to be this sort of representative of chivalry and nobility and military prowess, etc., etc. But we find out that he's actually kind of a scumbag in a way, because he tries to seduce Luca, who is the servant of the Petkovs, and he says he sets up this really interesting idea that there's multiple Sergiuses, that there are different Sergiuses in different situations. And he says, actually, sort of muses to himself, he says, "Which of the 6 is the real man? That's the question that torments me. One of them is a hero, another a buffoon, another a humbug, and perhaps a bit of a blackguard. And one at least is a coward, jealous like all cowards." So, Sergius, the noble hero of this war, the chivalric lover of Raina Petkov, etc., etc., is clearly aware of just how much he fails in this sense. So again, we've got that sort of illusion of noble love that Shaw is just taking a sledgehammer to here. And then at the end of the play, we get one last illusion broken. And this is a really interesting one, because throughout the play, Bluntschli is eminently pragmatic. Bluntschli Bluntschli doesn't tend to go in for illusions. He doesn't tend to go in for imagination. He is a realist. But at the end of the play, Bluntschli reveals that, in his own words, I, a commonplace Swiss soldier who hardly knows what a decent life is after 15 years in the barracks and battles, a vagabond, a man who's spoiled all his chances in life through an incurably romantic disposition. This guy who up to now has shown almost no romance is now proclaiming himself to be an incurable romantic. And what ends up happening is that we learn the reason that Bluntschli does not want to court Raina is because he thinks that she's 17 and that he's far too old for her. When he finds out she's 23, everything changes for him. Suddenly he becomes very, very interested in pursuing her because Sergius has broken up with her to marry Luca. And Raina and Bluntschli are in love, but they've been unable to admit it to one another or to themselves. And it's only when Bluntschli finds out that he was wrong in thinking her just a sort of silly, romantic young girl, and actually finds out that she's a woman who knows her own mind, that he becomes interested in marrying her. And so Sergius expresses it really well. He says, Bluntschli, my one last belief is gone. Your sagacity is a fraud like all of the other things. You have even less sense than I have. So, the man who has stood throughout the play as the impartial, pragmatic realist is suddenly revealed to be as mistaken as everyone else.